Hello people. So, not so long ago I made a video about a police brutality case in New York City that led to a death. Eric Garner, I believe the victim's name was. I laid out my thoughts on that, and like many people I was outraged. And it's not the first such case that has happened, whereby that has happened. There's many other examples of police brutality around the world. The US gets highlighted more than other countries, but doesn't mean it's the only place where it happens. We have had cases in the UK as well. So these things got me thinking about these incidents, got me thinking about what exactly we mean by police brutality, but also as a society, what role exactly we want the police to have. Now on the surface that seems like a simple question. Oh well, the police catch criminals. That would be the most simple explanation. Of course it's a lot more, it's not quite that black and white. As a citizen, my interpretation of what the police should be is a body of people whose job is to keep us safe as citizens, to track down criminals, to go through the process of arresting the criminals if need be, apprehending them and so on, but also keeping law-abiding citizens safe. And as law enforcement officers, that should be the remit of what they're meant to do. But there's a lot of problems in terms of how this is sometimes comes across, because when you have brutality cases, now what I mean by that is officers clearly overstepping the mark, officers clearly using excessive force on a suspect who may be committing a minor offence, but the level of force is absolutely not proportionate to what he or she is doing. Eric Garner was a clear example of that. Brutality also means obvious things like beating a man at the side of the road. That's brutality. Basically it's any example of using excessive force. That is police brutality. But there's also police misconduct, which is a term that isn't used as much, but in many ways is just as important. It's not as glaringly obvious, because if someone's being brutally beaten up, they're going to have bruises and so on, that's obvious. But misconduct is less obvious, and yet it's still a big problem, because it is still actually a threat to democracy, to civil liberties, and to what we would interpret as a relatively free society. I don't believe there's any such thing as an absolutely free society anywhere in the world. So long as you have human beings, so long as you have issues like crime, then there's no such thing as absolute freedom. That's never going to happen. It's a naive utopian vision. So what we need to have in any progressive society is a situation where people are given as much security as possible as citizens. That means the right to live in peace and stability. Now, when criminal thugs make people's lives hell by terrorizing them, by putting windows in, by not caring about their behaviour at all hours of the night, this sort of thing, it's not a small matter. It can ruin lives. It really can. So there are times when a police uniform can be a very comforting thing, especially, for instance, if you are, let's say for instance there's a woman who's facing a violent husband. I know there's violent wives as well, but I'm just using it as an example. Let's say someone is facing a violent partner and they need help. For that person, seeing the sight of a police officer would be, I would imagine, some respite, even if it's limited as to what they can do there and then. There's other examples. If a young family is being terrorized by a gang and it's an emergency, they feel sieged in their own house, they call the police. The sight of the police would be a real liberating sort of feeling. There are many areas where the police are obviously a welcoming thing. a welcoming institution. And it's absolutely necessary that there is a police force in society. I don't take the anarchist logic of abolish the police. I think that's ridiculous. When Sir Robert Peel developed the modern police force in Britain in the 1830s, he had a vision of what that should be. I still believe British officers get the balance much better than their American counterparts. I believe in the United States the pendulum has went too much the other way of officers having far too much power. In the United States you have a situation whereby if someone questions why they are being arrested, that is considered resisting arrest. Rather than being forcefully, trying to fight off officers, actually asking what they are being arrested for is considered resisting arrest. So this robotic sort of mentality among far too many American police officers, and I'm not generalizing, I'm not saying it's everyone, and it's something I want to be very careful with, because the problem with police misconduct, police thinking that because they wear a uniform they can do whatever they want and treat who they may suspect to be a suspect, whether they actually are or otherwise, in a very sort of way whereby they are taking advantage of that situation, not because it's a job, but because they feel they can. Now, it's a real balancing act here, because on one hand you want police who will keep the public safe, who will apprehend violent, dangerous people, who will take on criminals, and from that point of view you need to understand the sort of pressures the police face. You don't need to be a police officer to guess that it's a pretty tough job. All police officers face situations that most of us don't have to on a daily basis. So we have to respect the human element there. Police officers are only human, and if he or she loses their temper or something, that's a human thing. But the problem is when they are in a position of authority, when they're in a position to have power, and it is a powerful position in the sense that they have the power of arrest, they have the power to stop anyone they like, etc. So in that sense it is a powerful position. Then you want officers who are level-headed, reasonable and professional people. If you have borderline psychopaths who just get a kick out of basically feeling powerful because they're wearing a uniform, that's very dangerous, and I think there's too many officers out there like that, especially in the States, and I think it's a big problem. As a citizen, I'm not anti-police at all. I think most officers are normal, decent people who are trying to just do their job. But I think the problem is that those who are guilty of misconduct, because the police all over the world has such a bad attitude to it, in other words, they put the officer in desk duty, and there's clear double standards when it comes to officers breaking the law and members of the public breaking the law. There is obvious double standards there. Now, when I look back at my own experience, all the interactions I've ever had with the police, it's more or less as follows. I served as secretary of a neighbourhood watch, which meant a bit of liaison work with the police, comparing notes, meetings occasionally, that sort of thing. Then there was also, I've been stopped for very, very minor things. For example, the lights on my bicycle weren't working properly, so officers have stopped me on those occasions and just told me to fix them on properly. I have to say, in my own experience, the local police force where I live, and I don't know if I could do this in video, but I can't see it being a problem. Well, I won't name the force, but the point is, in my experience, my local police force has been they're very professional. I've never had a problem with them in terms of how they've spoken to me as a citizen. I find, in my own personal experience, I find them very professional. I would say they're one of the best forces in this country. I'm referring to Northumbria Police. I've always found their officers, when I've spoken to them, to be reasonable, even when I was actually committing an offence by, for example, not having working lights. And it's a very minor thing, but it's a good barometer, because the officers who spoke to me, they weren't aggressive, they weren't threatening, they told me that I should fix the lights and get it sorted out. But I've no complaints about the way they were communicating with me. So The videos I make about police brutality and misconduct are not based on personal experience. My personal experience, for the most part, it's not universal. I had another experience where I was the victim of an assault, and I went to the station to report it. The officer on that occasion was incredibly rude. He was talking down to me, I think because I was a student at the time. I think he had a bad attitude towards students, but basically he was just like, get on with it, sort of tell us a story, I'm tired, I can't be bothered with this. And it was just a very degrading sort of attitude he had towards me, and I lost my temper, and I said a few things, and then he told me to leave the station, and he was a bit of an arsehole, to be honest. Just a really bad attitude to a member of the public who's just been a victim of a crime. But that was a long time ago. That was about 10 years ago. So I would say 70% of my personal interaction with the police has been positive. But that doesn't mean that there aren't serious problems out there, and it doesn't mean as a citizen I can't be concerned for them. I think it is entirely natural that people should question how much power the police have, how much power they should have. Now obviously you want police to have some authority. It would be a bit stupid expecting men and women in uniform to not have any sort of power, because then they couldn't do anything with criminals, people who actually are a threat to society. So you do want the police to have some level of power. The question is how they use that, and it's about getting the balance right. Now clearly the officer in the police station who just took a very bad attitude to me, clearly he didn't get the balance right. Now maybe he had a long day, I don't know, but there was no excuses for the way he was talking to me, and I filled out a complaint form for that. Although at that time the Independent Police Complaints Commission wasn't fully independent, I believe they still had influence from the police. I think it's improved since then, but that should be one of the absolute hallmarks of democracy. Every democracy should have a body that monitors police behaviour and allows members of the public to make a complaint, and for that complaint to be investigated independently. And police forces should not stand in the way of justice. If one of their officers has been guilty of misconduct, it's no good just putting them on desk duty. They have to take that very seriously, because the chances are they'll do it again. Like I said, the officer involved in the Eric Garner case had already received warnings. My apologies, he'd already been sued twice by members of the public. So, you know, I'm talking about the human factor, but then you also get a situation with those officers that clearly are abusing their position time and time again. Those sort of people clearly don't deserve to be in a position of responsibility. So what I'm trying to get at here is, if you're in a situation where you're being threatened by, say, some knife thug, now you could be try and be a tough guy and take him on, or her on. The chances are you'll get stabbed. There's a reasonable chance. I'm quite physically strong. I don't consider myself a timid person, but then that's the other problem. We've had this situation in Britain. There's a real murky area as to how much the public can actually defend themselves, because there's been many examples of homeowners going to court because they injured a burglar or someone else who they felt was a threat. Now that's clearly a disgrace. And I've seen Americans comment on that and say, oh, this is why you need guns. Well, that argument falls flat. I'm not even going to get into that, but the point I'm making with that is that if the public take the law into their own hands, then you get a Wild West society, and you do get a situation like the United States whereby innocent people get injured by other citizens who are paranoid and who think that it's a burglar when it's actually just someone, well, Trayvon Martin for a start. But not to go off on a tangent, what I'm trying to say is that you need a balancing line when it comes to law enforcement. You want officers that are prepared, professional and reasonable people. You want them to be tough enough to be able to take on hardened criminals, but you don't want them to be borderline psychopaths who will take a robotic Robocop type attitude to anyone who questions them. In other words, if someone is committing a very minor offence and they sort of say, oh, why am I being arrested or something like that, and then the officer turns around and beats them up, that's not the sort of situation you want. Because I'm talking about hardened criminals, but most people have probably committed a minor offence at some point in their life, whether that be a motoring offence or something like, in my case, not having lights on my bicycle that were working. Very minor things, but still. So you want officers that judge the situation with clarity, with professionalism. And you also want, the government also needs to get balance right, or whereby it supports officers, understanding the sort of work that they face, understanding the pressures that they're under, supports them in the sense of saying, we will give the men and women of our law enforcement and the things that they need in order to do their job, but at the same time not giving them so much power that those among them who do get a power kick out of wearing a uniform, who will abuse their position, they cannot get away with that. So all of this is about balance. You don't want an anarchist society where criminals can do what they want. If you feel under threat, you want a professional person there to help you out and to arrest the criminal, to apprehend the criminal, to confront the criminal. Incidentally, just in case anyone's wondering, the situation in Britain regarding self-defence within homes is being reformed, because there was a few cases whereby homeowners were prosecuted by criminals for standing up for themselves, and that understandably provoked a lot of anger. Even the police thought that was ridiculous. I believe the Police Federation supported homeowners' right to do that, and the Prime Minister does. Most people do. It's common sense. But the fact of the matter is, there are times when you can't take the law into your own hands and you need to get assistance, and on those occasions you want professionals. So this is all about balance. It's about officers who don't have a prejudice against any group in society, who are professional, level-headed, courageous, that goes without saying, or at least brave, stoic, let's say, but level-headed. I mean, the police need to understand that whilst they face this sort of stuff every day, the average member of the public doesn't. So they cannot put the same expectations on the public that they put on themselves, because they're facing it every day. So it's unreasonable to expect the public, for example, if a member of the public is clearly distressed or emotional, officers should be sympathetic to that. There should be a human aspect there as well, and sometimes it's missing. Not always, but sometimes. And like I said, my own dealings with police officers has mostly been good. So when police brutality cases happen, people say, oh, they're all pigs, they're all scum and so on. I can understand the anger, but it's really not the case. I'm sure there's plenty of officers out there, in the US as well, who don't condone this sort of thing. Although I do believe there's an institutional culture within most police forces of protecting their own. I believe that is undeniable, and that's something that low-level PCs, it's beyond their control if it's an institutional thing, because those who do want to speak up are isolated, and there is a culture of bullying in the police forces. So there's a lot of things to think about here. Sorry for talking for 18 minutes, but I think it's a very important issue. It's absolutely central to democracy, how you get the balance right. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to share any of your own thoughts. So what I'm saying in conclusion, it's about balance. You want officers that can do their job and who are enabled to do their job, but you don't want officers overstepping the line and who will not face consequences if they do abuse their position, because then you're basically living in a police state, and it's a threat to the very principles of democracy, of civil liberty, and of a free society. And it makes it rather difficult for a country like the United States to lecture other countries when its own situation is very, very far from perfect.